invitation and thanks for the introduction. It's nice words, but those are words. Let me say something about supervision, and I will speak from personal experience. I'm not an expert in the theory of supervision, so this will just be my experience over the years. I have a number of discussion points that Inga asked me to look at, so I'll just put them all down. And it starts with the journey as a supervisor, and then quite a bit on the approach to supervision, which is then a very personal thing in terms of what I experienced and what I deem to be important. Some challenges, the way the university supports it or does not support it. And then extremely important, the examiners to choose, publishing, and a few words in conclusion. And of course, then time for questions. Now, I must first of all start off with a warning. It's not a nice way to start, but we are statisticians. We study variability and we understand variability. And one area that we must understand variability very well is in supervision. And we must always keep that in mind and manage it. And I'll say more about that as I go along. But this is now people variability. But I find that extremely important and have found that critical in my own supervision. To talk about journey as a supervisor, I have to say something about my career journey, and Inga has mentioned it more or less. I started with a doctorate at Northwest, what's now Northwest. And then I stayed in that environment for 10 years, also doing some postdocs and visiting academic work. And then I left academia for 18 years and then was fortunate to come back and have been back for about 25 years. So it's a long period, but it's a lot of different things which I enjoyed. Okay, now my journey. The first thing I realized and found is that not only the student grows, but the supervisor grows. When you're a young academic and you are a supervisor, there's a lot of uncertainty. And as you grow more experienced, of course, your uncertainty decreases and you become more sure of what to do and the route to take and what not to do. So there's a lot of changes in yourself, and that, of course, influences your style. When you start off, you probably have few responsibilities apart from teaching. So you focus a lot on that one student that you have to supervise, and he or she becomes quite a focus point of your work. But as you grow more experience, you get more responsibilities. You might have a few students at one time, and that has a split of your responsibilities, your time, your effort, and you must be able to manage that. But that comes with time and with experience. The one thing I've found, and I think it's not uncommon, is that there is an influence of your own supervisor on your style, especially in your early years. Your supervisor's style is sort of the only reference you have, and you imitate that to more or less of a degree. Often it's extremely good. I was fortunate to have a very good mentor to follow, and but as you carry on, you of course develop more of your own style. But at least in the early years, your own supervisor has an extremely strong influence on your own style. my own path as supervisor, the first 10 years started with only masters. We didn't have any PhDs, and if there were any, they would not have been trusted to me. I was only trusted with a master's, but it was a good learning experience, and I learned a lot from that because the risk in a master's is much less than in a PhD. So I could see that as a learning experience. I also saw that masters are, especially for a young academic, is also a way of getting nice publications without the long stretch of a PhD that you have to supervise. So I really learned a lot from that, and I found it very, very useful in my early career. Then my first PhD actually came when I was a non-academic, and in that period I had 3 PhDs at 3 different universities, and 2 of them were jointly with other supervisors. So it was a wonderful experience, either to work with one student by myself or with 2 colleagues with the other students. And being a non-academic, I was outside of the normal hours of the university. So a lot of it was, basically all of it was done part-time. But it taught me the how to manage my time so that I could do my daytime job and still supervise after hours. So in that sense, I found it very, very useful. Then I became an academic again, and then I had a fair number of PhDs. Of course, as you know, PhDs are fairly scarce in South Africa, in statistics at least. So I'm very fortunate to have had quite a few PhDs. And from that, I could learn a lot and try and contribute to their own careers. So what I'll talk about will be the focus on PhDs. I don't talk about masters, not because I feel that's not important, but I feel my experience has been more with PhD than with masters. At Stellenbosch, we often a teaching masters, where the thesis part is fairly small. So it's not the full master's thesis. So it plays a smaller role in that. So our experience is few and far between. But still at many masters, but then the thesis is a smaller level. Okay, the categories that I find of PhD students are the full-time, where someone is a full-time student and often has only an assistantship. So there's quite a strong focus on the PhD, and also time availability is good. Then you have the part-time external. And by external, I mean external to the university, someone working outside, usually in the private sector, and wanting to do a PhD. And then you might have a colleague in your department that's doing a PhD. So there again, you have a more close relationship, at least physically, than the external PhD. And then the last category that I was fortunate to have some experience with was a non-South African. Simply, I mention that because it brings in other issues, things like housing and visas and all kinds of other issues. Also, closer collaboration with the university, international departments, and so on. But those are the categories that one finds, and also there's different responsibilities and different issues in those categories. So it also implies different approaches. You can't just approach them all in the same way. Now, the way I see my responsibility as a supervisor, first of all, I take it extremely serious. I think it's a major responsibility. And the main reason for that is it has a huge effect on a student's career. And the way you guide your student, the way you support him or her, the way you spend time with him or her, almost the way you show them the way, if I can call it that, the example that you set, I find and take very, very seriously. Of course, one should be very, very careful in your choice of students. And for that, I see some kind of initial screening as very important. First of all, the background knowledge of the student. And I'm mostly referring here to students coming from outside. If you have a student already in your department that's gone through your department's undergraduate and master's programs, then typically you know much more about that student. But if you have someone coming from outside, it's extremely important to have their background knowledge. And then the ability, of course, to try and understand whether a student has the ability to do a PhD. And the temperament compatibility is to me very important. I want to work with someone that I can work with, and I'll get to that again. But I need a strong commitment, and if there's not that commitment and commitment does not remain, then one has to know that upfront. So I try and screen that carefully for the compatibility with myself. Research, as you know, is not something that, just happens. There's a lot of perseverance, and the student you take on must be able to persevere, because you have your ups and you have your downs, and you have your good days, and you have long stretches of struggling with the work. And if you can't persevere with that, then you should not start. The one thing I find very important is that a student from outside, and by outside I mean exterior to our university, is the references. And I find that especially important if a student has done the master's degree at overseas, where one has less contact. If it's done at a South African university, one usually knows colleagues there and you can check personally. But often students overseas do a master's degree. The supervisor is a nice person, so they write nice references. But you have to dig a bit deeper to make sure the reference and the ability and the style and everything corroborate. That you don't end up with a nice reference, but a student that's not up to what you require. So I've burnt my fingers with that. I've learned my lesson with that, and I'll try and manage that very, very carefully. I upfront try and lay down a few rules, and because I take the supervision seriously, I want the student to understand why I take it seriously and what seriously involves. So I have a few requirements. A student must be serious about the PhD. And especially, of course, with part-time students, that commitment is easy to make. But if it's only lip service, then you're not going to get far. It must be a high priority. There are many things that can distract you from your PhD, and this must be a high priority. I must have regular meetings, even if a student comes and tells me that there was no time. But then again, I want to query that no time, but the regularity in meeting is extremely important. And often we have this, there was no time available. And I do have the feeling that one must press a bit harder on that. And I like to say up front that you must make time available in spite of, and I'm not underestimating the challenge of that, because people, especially part-time students, have all kinds of important commitments, but they must know that up front. You know that this is not just a second priority, this is a high priority, and you must make time, energy available in spite of other commitments. Then remember and take into account the variation in student abilities. And after you've had a few students, supervised a number of students, you find the student abilities differ in many ways. And it's not only technical abilities, there are also other abilities, including their research ability. You know, it might be a student that came through with a very good learning ability, but a research ability, especially on the PhD level, is also something that varies between good students. And then something that's often lacking, but is critical to a PhD, is your writing ability. And in a way, one must remember it's the student's PhD, it's not the supervisor's PhD. So the student must at least learn to write. And if you have natural writers, but then you have students that are terrible in writing. And most universities have writing schools or departments or institutes. And if it's bad enough, they should go and learn there to write. But make sure that the writing ability is up to standard. Otherwise, it becomes a huge problem at the end of the day. And some have more research experience than others. Some did a master's where they did a good research project. Others had less experience, especially in cases where they do a teaching master's, then the research experience has been fairly minimal, and it's been mostly a literature kind of study. So the actual research in terms of really getting into a problem, working through a problem, persevering with the problem is less than the student who had a full master's. The research proposal or the area of research depends, of course, whether it comes from the supervisor or from the student. If it comes from the supervisor, then I should have proper knowledge in that area. And it comes back to my taking my responsibility as supervisor very seriously. And for that reason, I must have good knowledge before I propose a problem for a student. I might have a lot of interests and know a little bit about this, a little bit about that. I even see a gap in a piece of research or in a paper. That could be a nice research problem for another paper, but that's different to a PhD. PhD must be something that can lead to a PhD. The problem you tackle must lead to a PhD. And of course, when you are less experienced, that becomes more difficult. Now, most universities have a screening process for proposals that have to be accepted before you can start with that research. But still, at the end of the day, it boils down to the supervising, knowing and understanding the area well enough so that there is a PhD that can come out of it. The second thing is, I make the proposal. The student must have an interest in that. Interest in not only doing a PhD, but doing a PhD in an area that you're often going to struggle is extremely important. You cannot have a disinterested student or a mildly interested student. Your student must be good and all interested. The student must understand the problem. I have a problem. I've been working with a problem for some time, so I have a good grip on the problem. For the student, it takes a bit of time to get to a proper understanding, and the more they understand, of course, the more they can start contributing. Prior to that, or part of that, is their own literature knowledge. They often come in cold into that area, so you have to guide them through the literature. And literature nowadays is overwhelming. There's so much in the literature that one feels you have to know before I can start. And there it's important to guide the student. There's certain papers that you can read the title only and discard. Others you must read the abstract and discard. Others you must read the abstract and say, aha, there's something I should know more about. And then you read it sort of superficially before either discarding it or going into it deeper. And then there are papers that you really want to get into. And it takes a supervisor often in the early stages to give guidance on that. If you don't do it, then the poor student drowns in the amount of literature that has to be handled in building this literature knowledge. So make sure that you yourself have a good idea of where you can just glance at, where you must read in depth. Then back to the writing. Writing, I think, starts very, very early. And if you wait too long, then it becomes more difficult. So I like to start at an early age, if only with a skeleton. And there is a kind of a generic skeleton for any research. There's always an introduction and there's always conclusions at the end. There's always a background and there's always something on the literature. There's something on your contribution. There's something on the results and the analyses, and there's the conclusion. So there's a fairly generic way that you can put down from almost day one. And once you have that, you can start filling in parts in that skeleton. And of course, you can discard. But start early with that framework. Then plagiarism is a is a problem, and I mean non-deliberate, not the people trying to do plagiarism, and I find that with myself. I read something and someone says it in a nice way, and it sticks in my mind. And a month later, I do something and I write something down, and subconsciously, I have this piece that I read from someone else, and it could almost be verbatim that I write it down. And I simply forgot that I actually read it from someone else. So when you read and you find something interesting, worthwhile taking note of, write it down with the reference, just for that or subconscious plagiarism. That was on the proposal from the supervisor. On the student proposal side, that often comes from an external student. He or she works in a particular environment. Often there's interesting problems generated in that environment, and they feel they want to do a PhD on that, and they ask you to supervise that. Now, there are two things to take into account. You should have enough knowledge to evaluate whether it's a useful problem to work on. In other words, it's a field that you can obtain a PhD in. And then you yourself must have enough interest in that field to guide the student and keep abreast. And this kind of supervision is different to a student that's in-house and you work with every day. So your type of supervision differs in terms of closeness of working together. Often such a student is a more mature student. They can work more independently, but be careful that they don't run away from you in the sense of they carry on in a tangent and you being left behind. And for that, make sure you also have regular meetings. Otherwise, if you have two irregular meetings, the student might go off on a tangent and you don't know where they are and you don't understand what's being done. So keep regular contact, even a little bit at a time, but regularly. I would not advise you to do that early in your career. It's typically a thing that you need more experience in terms of being able to, even in an area that you're less knowledgeable about, to be able to evaluate whether it's worthwhile in the area to do a PhD. So I wouldn't do that as a young supervisor, but as you go more experienced, you're also able to evaluate it more. You also have more contacts in your network that you can use as people giving input in deciding can it be done, should it be done, so on. But that comes with experience. On the availability, that boils down to the seriousness with which I take supervision. I must, and also upfront, make sure with myself and make a commitment with myself that I take on the students' supervision because I can and will be available. If I just take it on to have another PhD student and I skimp on being available, then it's a negative effect on the student's progress, also on the student's view of a PhD and supervision. So before starting on that, especially if you have a number of students that you have to supervise, make sure that you don't overburden yourself that you that you are able to manage 2 or 3 PhDs at the same time. It might be in quite different fields, and that's quite a challenge to keep abreast of everything and to jump between the different areas. Now, what happens typically over time is that the supervisor's dominant role in the beginning changes and shifts more towards a student. Maybe it's a student's PhD, and in the beginning, it's mostly the supervisor that gives the guidance, that has the background knowledge, that has the insight, and the student is a learner. But over time, the student becomes the guider, and the supervisor, in a way, becomes the learner. And this is especially true in more technical areas. For instance, nowadays, in joining statistics with machine learning and neural networks and so on, you might be an excellent statistician, might know all the asymptotics and theorems, but you might have less knowledge of neural networks, machine learning, and how they can be incorporated. But a younger student grew up with that, and they typically know and understand much more of that. So not only must you then allow the student to take more of a lead there, but you must also learn from the student. And that's one of the exciting things about the supervision, is that it's, in that sense, a lifelong learning. And I can vouch for that, even at my advanced age. There's so much to learn, and it's extremely exciting to learn these things. Challenges, first of all, the personality challenge. It's not, well, I have not too much experience of it. On and off, there's a bit of that, but you have to be careful in managing personality challenges. Remember, a supervisor and the student are 2 different personalities, and make sure you understand yourself so that you can better understand the student. If you're uncertain about that, there's good tests, personality type tests, such as the Myers-Briggs, gives you extremely good insight into yourself and into the other person. So if there are personality challenges, try and find support for that through other means. The one thing that's often a challenge is the progress. And as we all know, the research does not happen on a straight line. It goes up and then goes down. And in the downs, you have to persevere and keep on and keep on and keep on and keep on again. And for that, the student usually needs a lot of support. Okay, you're the one with the experience. The student is the one that's doing it for the first time. He or she does not know whether it's the end of the road. You can see and understand that there's still something on the other side of the hill. But for the poor student, it looks like a mountain they have to get over. So that needs special support for the student from your side. With part-time students, of course, when they work, they have other obligations, especially in a working environment. They have all kinds of crises, and the boss wants something tomorrow, but you have a meeting with your supervisor tomorrow. And of course, for the student, the boss is more important than the supervisor. So make sure that you can handle that, and you handle it with not too soft a heart, but also with understanding. The university support, of course, one of the main things is the computing. Statistics is more and more a computing intensive discipline, so we need that. And I think at this stage, most of our departments have very good computing and supercomputing and things that are needed. Often the student is not familiar with that, so we need some support in getting to the right place with the right people at the right time. The finance, always an issue, but we do have assistantships, there are bursaries. Again, you know more about that than the student, so they need support in getting to the right financial support. The other thing I find important is to have interaction and networking amongst, first of all, PhD students, and SASA as a way of bringing together younger people. But you can also, via your own network, bring the student in contact with other researchers. It's good for them to not only know their supervisor, but also know other more senior researchers. It's also useful for future work for them to network with others. There must be a research life after the PhD, and for that, the network is one of the best ways of carrying on with your research after your PhD. The supervisor, of course, works for the university, and the question is always, what kind of support do you get from the university? Support in terms of how serious does the university take your work as a supervisor, in terms of work planning, in terms of the credit you get for your supervision. And hopefully that's something that most universities place a high premium on. If not, it's time to speak to the head of department or the dean or the rector or whoever, but it's important that the university gives you the support that you need. The choosing of examiners is something that's extremely important. You have to choose it very carefully. You remember I said that you have a strong effect on the career or future career of the student. Part of that is to get the PhD over the line. Part of that is getting it past the examiners. So choose them carefully. Choose them as being knowledgeable, but certainly not finicky people. You have examiners, and some are technically extremely good people, but as an examiner, a disaster. Others are knowledgeable, very knowledgeable, and good as examiners. So try and discriminate between that. Some of it comes with time. Some of it comes with your own network. And part of your network, of course, is your experienced colleagues. So before you jump into deciding, I want to use these examiners, make sure from your colleagues, from your network, that there's no kind of blemish on that person as an examiner. Other people might have had negative experiences, and then stay away from that. But make sure you get someone knowledgeable that can give you a good report, knowledgeable report, but not something that just has to do with the spelling or the minor things in the thesis. Joint publications. the first priority, of course, is the student must publish. Otherwise, it's almost not good work. But a PhD should be publishable. Whether you have a joint publication, I feel depends on how much you actually contributed. Sometimes your contribution is fairly small. This often happens with external students that come with a problem in an area that they work in, and you almost give more guidance in terms of the direction and when what should be done rather than in-depth technical contributions. So then one feels uncomfortable to be a joint author. But the first priority is always that work must be published. To conclude, just some points. A student must be interested, must be enthusiastic, must be dedicated, must be capable. Otherwise, it's a non-starter. Supervisor has this extremely important role in a student's career. For both of them, it must be a high priority. It's no use just telling the student it should be a high priority for you if it's not a high priority for yourself. The supervisor must have a level of knowledge in his own research to supervise. Don't jump into areas that you're fairly uncertain about. Rather make sure that you get yourself up to a level that you can supervise in that area. And then in terms of supervision, but also in research in general, keep a list or a set of research problems that as a good student comes along, you have something available. Okay. Or if you wake up one morning and you feel you want to do research, there's a problem waiting for you. And then finally, enjoy it. It's a struggle often, but it's such a worthwhile struggle, and it gives so much joy in feeling that you've accomplished something for this young person or younger person that goes out with a PhD, goes out into a career, and you were part of the preparation for that career. It gives a lot of joy, apart from also getting credit for your own research participation in the PhD. So enjoy it, and thank you. Good luck.